Get your perspective from Manish Chokhani and Navneet Muno on budget and markets, the correlation, the impact that they see and the key takeaways. Listening.
I think broadly what the bet seems to have been this time is if you want to catalyze the whole process of economic recovery, and domestic capital seems to be starved right now. The bet seems to have been on attracting foreign capital, and there is a lot of capital sloshing around the world. So while a lot of attention has been on the sovereign bond issuance, it's still probably going to be of the magnitude of 10 billion at best. So it's not something which is a game changer. But the fact that they've actually uttered the word of strategic sales, trying to get more foreign direct investment into India to try and get us into the indices by way of removing the sectoral caps, by way of asking the listed companies to go from 75 to 65 and so on. So those are the kind of building blocks. And as Nikunj therefore rightly said, it's more about how this gets implemented and at what pace. And like the government loves to say, the budget is not the one-day exercise of reform. It's an ongoing process. So let's see how this picture evolves.
But that still addresses the revenue side.
Sure.
It doesn't address the expenditure side.
Right.
You know, what would you have liked to see, or you know, what were the big misses on that?
You know, I think of the budget in a very simplistic way. If you think even the revenue side, it's a 3, 4, 5% country. We collect 3% from income taxes, 4% from corporate taxes, and 5% from indirect taxes.
Sure.
Now, if I get 7% of collection from direct taxes on a saving rate of 25%, I don't think there's a lot more scope in direct taxes. And therefore, you saw this continuous assault on the so-called super rich, although I don't subscribe to $700,000 being super rich in the context of the world. But on indirect taxes, I'm kind of surprised that with a headline rate of 18% on GST, how is it that we accept a 5% collection as the norm in a country where, in theory, now everything seems to be covered by GST? And I'm removing the 2%, which is customs and excise, which is on petroleum products, because 2% of SGST is not counted in the central figure. So the number is still 5% of what they collect. So revenue is a problem. And in a country which pays $100 billion a year in interest, and the 3.5% fiscal deficit number and the interest number basically are the same number, there had to be a more concerted effort on getting revenues by selling assets. And a government which has a charge on every single producing asset in the country, including its citizens and its assets, why should it be owning anything? I collect 18% of top line from everyone, and I collect effectively 30% of whatever you make. So what's the need for me to hold that asset? If you can hold it and you can produce a better return, that's directionally where you could have gone, and that would have given you resources to go and spend more. Turning to expenditure, let me do that also very briefly. If you take the 3.5 deficit and interest as a separate number, what they get from non-tax revenues is 1.5% of GDP, and that goes into capex. So the capex number of India is a measly 1.5% of GDP, which is 0.5 goes to defense. After all the hula bula about defense being the backbone and Rafale jets and all, it's 0.5% of GDP. 1% goes in pensions, 1% goes in salaries, even in the defense budget. So where is the outlay for defense? The other 0.5 on railways and NHAI, now they are going and borrowing on their own. So that's off the government balance sheet. So you're not going to see kickstart coming from government anymore. And in some sense, you've run out of options over there as well. And if you disaggregate the remaining expenses, which is 8%, you do 1.5% on subsidies, 1.5% on your social schemes, which is health and education. What are you left with? The rest we are paying for basically salaries for collecting and distributing these monies. So pretty grim in that sense.
Yes. Navneet, with the political mandate, this could have been a forum where some grand showcasing could have been done. You have the political mandate. You have to thread the needle because there is a big slowdown in the economy. There is a global trade warfare which is real. India is highly uncompetitive when it comes to taxes, land reform, interest rates. There is nothing in the budget which will make India more competitive. And if you're not competitive, we can kiss goodbye to the whole dream of becoming $5 trillion.
So just on the 3, 4, 5, so the direct taxes were just 2.5% of the GDP in 90s. And over the last 15 years or so, we moved from 2.5 to 7, while the indirect taxes as a percentage of GDP have not gone up because, the GST is a recent thing. If you go back and remember the service tax example, when it started in 90s, it took a couple of years for it to become just 1% of the overall tax revenues, and then it became 10 and 15% of the overall tax revenue. But it took a couple of years. My sense is the same is likely to happen on GST. The first few years are going to be a real struggle, and that's what the government is quite constrained to really think about spending anywhere, because where do you raise revenues? On the income tax side, on the personal income tax and corporate tax, you already hit the limit. The whole world is cutting rates. You compare yourself with US, the kind of rates they are paying, and we in a developing country, the kind of rates that we would be paying. How would
with the
we be
infrastructure
competitive?
what we have?
Exactly.
And the healthcare
so
cost
the cost of
and
power,
the inflation we have.
Exactly. The cost of land, labor, power, transportation, communication, capital, everything, the way you pay, unless you become a lot more competitive on all of these or most of these, how do you attract a lot of manufacturing here? But I think there is intent that we need to move towards that. There is intent that we need to move towards more of ease of doing business. I think a couple of minutes got spent in the budget speech on the simplification aspect, the whole elephant example. I hope that they really work on that. In fact, I think that we should change the names of the GST and the income tax. Income tax should be called maybe a Swabhiman Yogdan, and a GST should be called a Rashtra Nirman Yogdan. And if you really want to make it simple, I mean, the biggest legacy, as you said, the new government with the mandate could be to build a trust with the business community and to build a trust with taxpayers. You say you can only pay through an app where you just put the Aadhaar number and you put your details. 99% of files will not get opened. Only 1% by whatever rotation or machine where you ask for further details, and within that 1% maybe you do deeper scrutiny, and then you really go after them if somebody has hidden anything, I mean has tried to hide something. And that can maybe pave the way for maybe a better compliance.
Okay.
But I agree with him, there's very limited scope for the government to really spend money given the current construct of the balance sheet.
So we've been prescriptive so far. What we've discussed is what should have been done and what has not been done. Now let's try and be predictive.
I'll still take a minute. You know,
You can take a few.
We are still celebrating that we have opened a new window to foreign capital by sovereign borrowing. But I sometimes feel that is $10 billion the extent of our aspiration to raise from the world when there's trillions floating around?
Because the definition of super rich is 5 crores.
Now,
so our aspirations are obviously low from a government standpoint.
When there is trillions of dollars floating around the world looking for a country where there is growth and there is opportunity, and every single one of our large industrial houses, from Ambani to Tata to Birla to Chandra to everyone, is selling assets and recycling their assets to produce something better and heading towards the future. What on earth are we doing holding on to our national debt? If we are paying interest of 100 billion a year,